More and more now, you're starting to find yoga practitioners who are doing deeper meditation stuff.
Yeah.
But I think that's the key in getting in the energy level where you can find that stuff. But the high level Qigong, like my Qigong teacher studied with this, his uncle and grandfather were high level Qigong masters. He studied with other Qigong masters, and then his main teacher was Master Yang, who he was number 19th. So he taught 18 students once he turned 50. He taught Dr. Zhang because he knew what he knew. But different stages of the time, he studied with different masters. And one master, there's a video of, on Chinese New Year's, they always do a big national broadcast of just like different things. And this one master does this demonstration where he has 2 toads in a bag. And he puts the toads on the ground, takes a glass of water, fills up his mouth with water, takes a brick, and spits the water out and chops the brick in half. And then he steps off the frogs.
He steps onto the...
He's stepping on the frogs. The frogs are underneath his feet. And he takes a glass of water and spits the water out and chops the brick in half. I'll show you the video later. It's pretty fascinating. But I asked him about that, and he's like, well, what's that to do with the frogs? He's like, oh, I don't know. But he's like, he never taught us, he taught to the public very watered down stuff. He's like, he never taught us that stuff. But he said after that video, his teacher yanked him by the thing and took him off in the mountains and stuff. So the high level stuff you will never see demonstrated because they have no interest in that.
So why is that?
I think part of it is just like they're just taught that way. And like, I think, dissolving the ego and stuff like that. Like recently he told me a story when he was in college. So this is, 40 something years ago. One of his classmates was doing some research and they went to Shaolin. Mm-hmm. At that time at the Shaolin temple, there was only 2 people there. There was like a half blind monk and another monk covering the grounds. Yeah. Because Mao kicked everybody out for the Cultural Revolution. He said there was manuscripts and herbal formulas of like all kinds of amazing stuff. Looking at this herbal formula for like if you get kicked in the nuts and your testicles squished, here's an herbal formula for that. Like he was just blown away like how disarray it was. Wow. And then, after Mao died, then, in the late 70s and 80s, you started seeing the Qigong stuff. And there's a really famous Shaolin master, Hai Tung or Hai Dai, I don't know how you say his name, but he's the monk who's 90-something years old, could do a 1-finger handstand. It looks fake, but he's not fake. He can take a punching bag filled with sand and he would do his meditations and just punch it with 1 finger and sand would come out. So I asked Dr. Zhang, was he high level? And he's like, oh no, he wasn't high level because he was the interface between the high level and the public. So he's like the high level people, they just want to do their meditation, they want to cultivate, they don't want to have anything to do with, the day-to-day stuff.
Yeah.
So I was like, whoa, that's high level? Or Hai Tung wasn't high level? It's like, in my mind, that's pretty powerful.
Wow, do you think, I used to think about this question a lot because my first reaction is like, if people, well, first of all, everybody should learn Qigong. Everybody should learn about these things and they know what the possibilities are. They look at their world, they look at their bodies and themselves in a different light. Mm-hmm. And then I think, well, if people are seeing these extraordinary things happening, then they can go, wow, it's possible. Now I understand that this is not just fairy tale, this is not just in the movies, but this is real life. It can happen. And then I started thinking about why people, like you said, the ones that can do this, the ones that are at that level, they don't care to share it. They just want to go and meditate in peace, and they're okay with not having it go out everywhere. And I used to think about why that was.
Well, my teacher told me, from his perspective, nothing good can come out of demonstrating something high level. One is they believe you and they want to learn and they won't stop bugging you. 2 is they think you're full of shit and like they cause trouble either way. So either way, it's a burden and it takes away from your personal development and practice. Yeah. So I can see that.
Is it almost where if somebody was to maintain that level of consciousness, that level of power, that they they wouldn't be able to do it if they're constantly being bugged, constantly interacting with people just to show me your trick, show me your trick, show me. I mean, they'll be invited to go everywhere just to show their powers, and it kind of takes them out of their.
It diminishes the power.
Yeah.
So there's street performers and stuff who can do all kinds of weird stuff. And one of the stories Dr. Zhang, my teacher, told us about was, there was a guy who learned from this master, and he could do this unusual thing where he'd take Chinese coins and take a stack of coins, like 5 or 6 coins, stick them to his forehead, and they would stick. And over time, the more and more he demonstrated to the public, he could only do less and less. And he'd go to his master and like, how come I can't do 5 coins anymore? It's like, you're showing off too much. Like, if you want to learn more, I'll teach you more, but you can't demonstrate anymore. So to demonstrate the higher level stuff, it costs a lot of energy.
Yeah.
So even back to the whole idea of like showing stuff for the future generations and stuff. If you look at the video of John Chang, the guy who lights the paper on fire, there's the second video that he came back with where he's like, after doing months and months of meditation in the woods and stuff, he had a vision of the future generations and how so much stuff was being lost. So he thought he would open himself up to scientific scrutiny, brought in these scientists and was demonstrating some of these things. And at the very end, one of the last days was he was taking a wooden chopstick and he was trying to push it through the table. And there was plastic on the top, so he couldn't go from the top. So he came from the bottom, pushed the chopstick through the table, and he chopped it in passing, and a splinter hit one of the women at the table and drew blood. And he said that night he came back looking very serious, like his old long dead masters came back and chastised them. And some of the rules with his sect was to never draw blood and to never show off. And then he shut everything down after that.
Wow.
But he was, opening himself up to like scientific scrutiny. They couldn't figure out how he could do what he can do.
Yeah.
He could touch you and you see the muscles twitching and stuff, like he could electrocute you.
I experienced that first-handed. I was before I used to get injured all the time, and I remember my dad telling me. So my dad told me one day, he's like, hey, I have a doctor friend who's really famous in China. He just came over. I'm helping him out with some papers, getting his driver's license, just getting him legit here in the States because he doesn't have any of that stuff. And you should go and meet him because later on you're not going to have the opportunity. He's going to be too busy. He's really, really good. And I was like, I have no idea what this guy does or anything. I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll just go see him. And so I went, and we went to like Chinatown in Houston.
Okay.
In just like this random little apartment. I remember walking upstairs and going in. And I meet this Asian guy. He's probably in his like maybe late 50s or 60s. And first thing he does is like he sits down, he does my pulse, and then within about 3 seconds he goes, "You have problems with your digestive system." I go, "Uh-huh." Yeah. He goes, "Yeah, and it's been a long time, right? It's like ever since you're young." You go, "Uh-huh." He's like, okay. And I was like, "Huh, all right, cool." So then I go to his table. He's like, "All right, take off your clothes, leave your underwear on, just lay down on the table." I'm like, "Okay." So I do that, and then he comes and he puts a wet towel, like a damp towel on my feet. I have no idea what he's doing. I'm like, he's doing a checkup or something. I lay there, and then he comes and he focuses, he breathes, does something like for maybe a few seconds, and then he asks me where would I want to start, and then I just say like my leg. So he touches my leg, and then my muscles seize up like electricity's running through, and I'm like, oh, and then I'm just looking at him, and I'm thinking in my mind, like, how's he doing this? What's actually happening? I know there's electricity coming through. My muscles are locking up.
Yeah.
And I remember like I don't want to ask him or be like stop. So I'm just like kind of glancing over to see maybe he's plugged up to an outlet or something,
Yeah.
And then, I was there for a little while, and I realized, number one, he's not plugged up to anything.
No.
And number two, I started asking him, and he said he's been practicing Qigong ever since he was like 4 or 6. And he was in his like late 50s already.
Yeah.
So all of his life. And I was like, wow. And he was just, and I was like, how are you doing that? And he's like, through a practice that I do, I'm able to generate the Qi, and I can have it direct out through my hands. And I was like, okay. And ever since then, I used to tell people this, and I'll tell them, and I go, he's like Raiden. Electricity on his hand. That's all I knew, because I couldn't really explain what was actually happening. I didn't know, I still don't. but I know what you're saying is entirely legit because I experienced it firsthand.
For sure. Yeah. And I've seen that firsthand too with different masters who come through town. When I was in acupuncture school,
Yeah.
I saw a master who could do that. He would charge about $1,000 a treatment. Yeah. And there's no faking it, you know,
Yeah.
it was legit. And you look at the reaction on the person's face and they're getting the shit shocked out of them.
Yeah.
And then, you know, what part of that guy's treatments was he would do cupping too, but it wasn't normal cupping. He would do the cupping while they're face down, and then he would wave his hand over there and pull blood out of them. So I've been doing acupuncture for 16 years, and I do cupping a lot.
Yeah.
You do not get blood in that cup. And so it's not like he took a little razor blade and poked holes or anything. He put the suction cup on there, waited several minutes, and then he was waving his hand, and then you just see blood coming out of it. And it got so thick and congealed. And that was part of his treatment, was like assessing like what the blood looked like. If it had bubbles, it meant this. If it was certain color, it meant certain things. And then he would base his herbal formula based on that. So
Wow.
that was pretty cool to see. Yeah. And he could take little rocks and just like break them with just one finger. So
Wow, it's like another world.
yeah. And like I've been with my teacher for 20 years, and when people talk about, well, you feel so advanced, like, no, I'm in kindergarten. I just know how to like speak. Like there's still so much more to learn. So, and I just see how humble my teacher is, and it's like, okay, you know, still so much to learn. So it's fascinating.
For the person that don't know anything about Qigong, you know, what would you share with them to kind of get them the basics, the foundational information?
Well,
What would you share is the most important?
yeah, Qigong is a new term. You know, I think it came out in around the 1940s. So Qigong, as what we understand it to be, has been around for thousands of years.
Yeah.
But Qigong, you know, the term Qigong is about 50, 60 years old. And it means like Qi is like prana. It's just this bioenergy. Gong means to cultivate or to work. So some people translate it as Qi as like energy work or energy cultivation. But it has its root in the same premise as yoga. Like yoga, my understanding of yoga means union. Mm-hmm. Union of what? Mind, body, energy. So if you're not integrating all three of those, then you're just like you see people at the gym all the time, just on the elliptical, watching a movie, listening to headphones, reading a magazine. Are they doing Qigong? Are they doing yoga? No, they're just moving their body. Is it beneficial? Sure. Could they get more out of it if they integrated their mind? Definitely. So yoga has that integration piece to it. Mm-hmm. Qigong, in order for Qigong to become Qigong, is you need that fusion and that integration of the mind, body, and energy. Mm-hmm. So with Qigong, there's literally thousands of different styles of Qigong. And anywhere from martial Qigong to Taoist, Buddhist, spiritual Qigong, Confucius Qigong, you know.
What's the difference between some of them? There are different styles, but what's like...
Well, the emphasis. So some people want to focus on health and longevity. Some people want to focus on connection to Buddha or to God. You know, I've really enjoyed the Taoists because if they want to cultivate their spirituality, it's not an easy task. It can take time. Yeah. So what they've decided to do is like focus on health and longevity to give themselves a timeline to develop spiritually. Versus a lot of the traditional Buddhists would just focus on enlightenment and they would neglect their body. And you would see a lot of the Japanese Zazen monks, diabetes, their legs go, paralysis and stuff like that. So the Shaolin comes from a martial tradition. You know, Damo came over from India and it's like, oh, you guys, your health is shit. So he went into a cave for 9 years, locked himself up, and came out with a practice that the Shaolin now do to build their body so they can cultivate their mind and their energy. So he hacked the body to integrate the energy and the mind so their meditation got better.
Nice. Let's talk about that a little bit, you know, about hacking the body, and so this way it affects the mind or makes their meditation better, makes them more happier, more joyful, more expanded in mind. Let's talk about that. So how does that happen? Because I have a general understanding, but I know your understanding is a lot more specific, and it's just so much more dialed in.
Well, I mean, all systems are very valuable and very beneficial, and some systems work better for certain constitutions and people's mind and their build. Our system comes from a very physical foundation of like we're engaging the physical to kind of really truly hack the energy and hack the mind, because most people don't have that powerful of a mind. Even though they think they do, they really have no clue what a truly focused mind can do, or have any relationship to this energy, but they have a relationship to their physical body. So we put the body under controlled stress. And, you know, we can break down stress into eustress and distress. You know, eustress will build the body stronger, distress can break it down. And it's going to vary from person to person. But if we do it in a controlled enough way, then their body's natural, innate survival mechanisms step into play. So we tap the body, we vibrate it to where it's challenging, but we're not breaking it down. And then the body just naturally evolves and adapts. Like if you go to the gym with a 5-pound weight and I go do this for 10 months, you're going to go, fuck you. I'm not going to do this for 10 months, because it's not challenging, it's not engaging. So we have to be on that right on that edge to where everything can stay integrated. You know, people now are really using the concept of the flow state, and the flow state I think is close to the Qigong state, but not. I think it's missing some pieces. But if it's not a challenging enough stress, then the body's not really engaged. If it's too much of a stress, it's activating the wrong hormones, and then it's causing distress. So we need that right balance of the right amount of stimulus and not too much to really engage it.
Distress is where the body feels like its survival is being is being what's the word, challenged, and so now it's releasing the hormones of like cortisol and things like that. But if the body is challenged just enough not to push over the line of being in survival, then the body has a way to be able to adapt to that stress and become stronger.
And they both will cause evolution and change, but one is a little bit more beneficial, because when you release those negative hormones, they're expensive. That's why when you look at all the extreme athletes who get into the flow state, the ones who do all the daredevil stuff can get into those amazing flow states, but they can't do it all the time because it's so exhausting, because they are tapping into that adrenaline level. So we want to get to the point where we're engaging into that flow state without tapping into the adrenaline, because the adrenaline weakens the kidneys tremendously. And in Chinese medicine, the kidneys are the root to your essence and to your overall sexual vitality and storehouse. So if we can keep that strong, and then circulate the energy and reinvest it back into the organism. So, you know, I've been gardening a lot, and I love explaining, you know, sexual energy in regards to Qigong and why we want to conserve it. Is if you have 2 tomato plants that you buy at Home Depot, and they have little flowers and little tomatoes on there because of the hormones that they use to get them started, you put them in the same condition. But on one of them, you pull off all the little flowers and all the little tomatoes, and you grow them for the entire season. What happens at the end of the season? The one that had the tomatoes, because of the hormones and stuff, will fruit, of course, and it'll grow and it'll produce more tomatoes, but it won't produce nearly as much as the ones that you pulled the flowers and the tomatoes off of the other one. Because the expression of the fruit is the expression of the sexual energy. By not allowing it to express itself, it was able to recycle the energy, build the structure stronger and bigger, and then it would yield more long term. So if you buy fruit trees or nut trees, when you plant them in the ground, they always recommend do not let it fruit the first several years, because it will make the plant stronger. So most people don't understand how valuable the sexual energy is and how to recycle it and transmute it and integrate it back into the system.
Here's the question, and I'm personally wondering, you know, me and Natalia were talking about this. Is it the same with women? Because I think, you know, like when we talk about men not ejaculating so we can keep the sexual energy, is it the same for women on not ejaculating, or you know?
It's different. Women lose a lot of their essence with their menstrual period.
So what about during sexual intercourse?
It's very beneficial, and because they don't leak it out. But if you do anything too much, then that too much orgasm, an orgasm disperses the energy. So too much can be leaking as well. But to activate it in, you know, frequent amounts is useful. But
so what would be considered too much? Like once a day too much?
For women, no. But some people might argue with me with that. But I think once a day is fine, or five times a week is plenty.
Okay.
But when people who have that shut down for so long, and then they learn about that energy, and then they get overboard. Like I dated this girl from Louisiana years ago, and she never masturbated until she was in college, and then she was doing it 10 times a day. And it's like, in looking at her pulse, feeling her pulse, like, oh, she was exhausting herself.
Wow.
So you can definitely exhaust yourself, but some is going to be very, very beneficial.
Yeah.
So with everything, there's balance.
Okay.
And even for men, you still want to use it every once in a while.
Yeah.
You don't want to just like, nope, never ejaculate. You do every once in a while.
What would be like a time frame you would suggest?
There's ancient books, and they have timetables and stuff
Yeah.
like that, and they're pretty spot on based on your age and health and time of year. So springtime and summer more so than wintertime. So
Is it the one I've briefly read through this book that was talking about when you're something like basically when you're young you can do it more often, when you're old just almost never do it at all. It was, and I forgot the way they explained it, but it was basically that was a sum. So I remember reading about it. It was like maybe once a month for me because I'm in my mid-30s or something like that.
no, I think once every couple of weeks is fine.
Yeah.
At your age and your vitality.
Yeah.
But to say unlimited when you're younger, no, because you want to train that function so that you have it later in life.
Yeah.
So that's why you see these Taoists and stuff, or lots of people can, men can still father children at 100,
Yeah.
Not a problem. It's pretty common.
Wow. What about women?
Women, not so much. The Taoists have a female practice where they call it slaying the red dragon. And the red dragon meaning the period, where they do a particular practice where they can actually turn off their period.
Wow.
And then later in life, monks and stuff can have children, later in life, 50, 60 and stuff, because they conserve that essence.
Yeah.
So it's there for later.
So in this case, they literally conserve the eggs.
Mm-hmm.
You just don't leave them out.
Yeah, and the blood and all that, and all that energy.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier about Qigong and flow state being similar but different.
Right.
And I've been really fascinated about flow state lately. So so tell me a little bit about that. Like, what's the difference between the two?
Well, I think people who are doing extreme stuff to get into that flow state is exhausting, and it's not building the energy.
Yeah.
So it's the energy going into entropy, it's disorder, versus keeping the energy integrated in a closed system that you can reinvest. So with a lot of Qigong, it's about circulating the energy and bringing in energy from the exterior and bringing it into the body. So one concept that I hear patients all the time in my clinic is like, oh, I was so stressed out, I need to go to the gym and blow off some steam.
Yeah.
I'm just like, for me, who's been doing Qigong for 20 years, that makes no sense to me why I would want to blow off steam. Versus like, I want to transmute, any stagnation and get the energy to flow and get it to circulate versus just let it go. Because that's our energy. So if we can contain our energy and just move it and circulate it, I can transform my emotions just by circulating it and moving it in my body and transmuting it into different kinds of energy.
Yeah.
Versus just like, just go.
Yeah, it's like logically it may make sense that they don't understand. They're like, I have stress and I want to blow it off. I'm just going to get rid of it.
Right.
But what you're saying is, well, if you have stress, that means there's stagnation somewhere, there's tension somewhere, and let's get it to flow so you don't have that stress anymore. That stress turns into just
So in Chinese medicine, stagnations can lead to imbalance and emotional imbalance. Too much energy in one meridian can lead to this emotion versus that emotion. So if we can unblock the qi, get it to flow, get the excess energy in one meridian to balance out into a different meridian, those emotions can clear. So back to the flow state is a lot of flow states, you activate a lot of the adrenaline to get into that, because people who aren't trying to get into the flow state, they know when they about to get into a car accident, the adrenaline kicks in and everything slows down. They can see everything in slow motion, but that's because of the hormone. So a lot of the extreme flow states is exhausting, versus Qigong states is building and nourishing.
And the experience is similar?
Can be very similar, yeah.
So when I read about flow state, like you said, it's like extreme athletes or it's something extreme.
Well, you have the other end of it too, who do the meditation and all that stuff.
And they can enter into
And
the
they,
flow state.
yeah, and you know, when I studied with Wim Hof a couple of times, getting that ice water and going underwater in the ice water is extremely flow state and blissed out. It's one of the most Zen states I've ever been in, holding my breath under ice water. It's like everything just turns off, and it's just like crystal clear. But that doesn't tax your adrenals too much when you've grown into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. First time for people, yeah, it's a shock to the system.
Yeah.
But if you kind of cultivate in that habit, your body starts to go, oh yeah, there's no reason to freak out here, and then you can control it.
Can somebody be in flow state without doing anything extreme?
Oh, for sure.
Like, so if somebody was writing, or somebody was painting, or maybe just cleaning the house or something.
Yeah, it just depends on how good your Kung Fu is. So it's hard to not talk about Kung Fu or Gong Fu while we're talking about this stuff, because we think martial arts when we think of Kung Fu. But Kung Fu in Chinese culture just means skill cultivated over time.
Yeah.
So a calligrapher can have great Kung Fu. A chef can have great Kung Fu. People who pour tea, who've been cultivating on how to pour tea correctly or the right way, have good Kung Fu. So I think those practitioners at that level, they're in a flow state, or they wouldn't be able to do the things that they do at that high level.
So when I think about flow state, and after reading about it and seeing that it was like triggered through high skill and high challenge, and that's how somebody would hit a flow state. At first I was reading it, it's like, there's a lot of extreme things.
Yeah.
And I started thinking, it's like if I was just washing dishes, but I was practicing on washing dishes without any thought, and washing dishes feeling really well, and all these things, like doing that action, it would allow me to be in a flow, versus like washing dishes and having a whole bunch of thoughts, or washing dishes and feeling this hurriness,
right?
Which would happen sometimes. And I feel like, well, challenging is relative to how a person would experience it.
So that's Kung Fu, that's Qigong, that's yoga, is being in that union of mind, body, energy. So that is a Qigong state, that is a Qi state or a flow state.
Yeah.
So for sure, you can cultivate those skills. And what I like about the Qigong practice I teach is that you're doing it 3 times a week, for 15 to 30 minutes. And what that does is it spills over in all these other areas of your life. And it just overflows, and then you can, washing dishes, walking becomes Qigong. Yeah. So it's like how you do one thing is how you do a lot of things. So if you can cultivate the skill in this one area, and it's profound, it will start to overflow into other areas. In Qigong, if you go to China in the parks or Taiwan, people are doing Tai Chi. That's a Qigong. They're doing, it's a martial Qigong. Yeah. They're banging on trees. They're shaking trees. They're playing with plants. They're walking funny. You can have walking Qigong. You can have sleeping Qigong. You can have meditation, can be a type of Qigong.
So let's say playing with plants. How would that be Qigong?
Well, they're already in tune with their true nature. So an acorn is never going to grow into a pecan tree. So in that little kernel of essence, it has this true nature already mapped out for it, and it's DNA basically. Yeah. So, most trees will live to its life expectancy. Some trees are known to live 4,000 years, some trees are known to live 50 years. Yeah. How long are humans supposed to live? It's an interesting question. And most people, if you ask how long are you going to live, they'll base it on their family history. Oh, my grandparents lived to 100, so I'm going to live to 100. Yeah. Or because of technology, and I'm going to live longer than them because of that. But humans don't live anywhere close to life expectancy. You see people 120, 130, people who, a cardiologist who wrote a book on running, dies from a heart attack at 40. That's a big discrepancy. Yeah. So like trees are intact in tune with their innate nature. So they're connected to the heaven above and the earth below and the energy between. And so they're in tune with the seasons. Humans aren't in tune with the seasons. So just by connecting into their energy, we can borrow from them. So if you have a whole bunch of tuning forks of all different notes, but you have one matching one in your hand, you vibrate this one, the matching one on the wall is going to vibrate too. So syncing, it's, what was the term they used for that? Who knows? It's a physics term.
Yeah.
But so if you're in a group of a bunch of happy people and you're upset, it's hard for you to not feel happy, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So a lot of Qigong is about what are you connecting to? What are you thinking? So if we can connect into longevity signals, into balance signals, then we can emulate them, we can borrow from them. A lot of martial arts and Qigong emulate animals for certain properties. You know, cranes for longevity, turtles for longevity, deer for vitality, and stuff like that.
So how do we connect to the signal or the vibrational frequency of something like?
Well, that's
example, like
the mind. The mind is the tuner. It's the receiver. So you can pick your radio stations.
Yeah.
Old days we had AM. Now we have AM, FM, XM, satellite radio. What are we linked into? What are we connecting into? What are you connecting into more frequently? And in this day and age, it's like we're marketed and programmed to think all these kind of things. How often do you have a free thought or original thought? So what are you focusing on more often than not?
Yeah.
So that's why we need to reset, connect in with longevity signals, connect into our true nature, so that we can have health and longevity and live to, you know, our planned potential. And what I mean by planned is like, you know, to blueprint, design how long you want to live. And when you design that strong enough, then certain habits will fall away that don't support that.
So if somebody wanted to connect to something, and like you said, their mind's filled with, you know, all these different things, and let's say if they wanted to connect to like a plant, would they be just like thinking about the plant?
I think just having curiosity. Curiosity is a really fun thing.
Yeah.
Like, what's going on with this plant? What does it feel like? Open-ended questions are very, very powerful if they're the right questions. Like, what can I do to feel better? Or versus, why do I feel bad? Why do I feel bad is not going to solve any problem. But what can I do to feel better? Oh, let's go outside for a walk. You know, your brain's going to give you positive suggestions versus looking through your data banks of things that will validate your question. So, you know, children are very inquisitive. You look at a lot of countries where they've cut back the amount of school and no homework because children are going to naturally find things that they want to learn about, and they learn. So, you know, playing in gardens, connecting in, like, what does this feel like versus what does this one feel like? You can feel tons of differences. This one's more yin, this one's more yang, and you can always create different things.
Nice.
Yeah.
What do you think about so I've been studying the mind a little bit, and I've been looking at the mind as conscious and subconscious, and I've learned that the subconscious mind is the body. What would you say to that? Would you say that would that be an accurate way to look at it, or what would you add to something like that? As far as like the subconscious mind, well, to be specific, like the subconscious mind is the body's, the condition of the body, the energy state of the body, or maybe the way that chi flows in the body would represent the expression of the subconscious mind.
I mean, the way I kind of view the subconscious mind is it's a hard drive, and there's no past, present, or future. It just is. The conscious mind has past, present, and future, and we can consciously choose to act a certain way. But if we have hardwired and blueprinted things from our past experience that were traumatic or positive, that's running in the background, even regardless of what you're consciously thinking. But you can go, okay, I'm going to be present, and you can override this programming. But the moment you're tired and don't feel like being conscious, then these things come to light. But I think there's a part of it that's the whole body. I think the brain is a very unique thing that makes us what we are. But I think the individual cells are way more powerful than the brain. And the individual cells take in so much information, and we can store tremendous amounts of, you know, positive and negative experience in the cells. But we have parts of the brain that filter out, you know, all the stimulation, all the stimulus that's coming in. And it's like, only this is the important thing. Like, our brain is prioritized seeing, hearing, tasting, and feeling as, that's all the information we need. Those are powerful enough, we can gather all this other information. But the individual cells are way more powerful, and they gather a lot more information than that. And they're feeling, you know, temperature, and, you know, when you look at natural disasters and stuff, like earthquakes and tidal waves and tsunamis and stuff.
Yeah.
In Thailand, when the tidal wave came in, the elephants knew way before, and they all went high. How do they know that? Because they have different cellular receptors that were tuned into something that we're not connected into. There was a naval ship off of one of the coasts right before an earthquake wind happened, and all these flying insects were covering the ship, and they couldn't figure out what was going on, and they kept spraying it and spraying it, and all the insects just went to and covered the ship. And they couldn't figure out why, and then days later, earthquake happened. So the insects knew. So you're saying insects are smarter than us? They just prioritize certain information systems that we don't utilize, but we have hardwired ourselves. Because if you think about evolution, we came from that stuff. So we have that information, we have that stuff, but we just choosing to use the cranial nerves more than everything else. So there's benefit to that, but there's a downside to that.
Do you believe that the subconscious mind can be reprogrammed?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
How would someone do that?
I think part of it is just consistency and new habits and stuff. Like we know the brain plasticity, we get hardwired for a certain thing, but it doesn't mean you can't learn new things. It's just hard at first. It takes frequency. One of my teachers says there's only two types of habits: habits of doing and habits of not doing. So the reason you're not doing it is because you're not in the habit of doing it. So part of Qigong is about frequency, because frequency drives change. If there wasn't stress and frequency, then we would never evolve. So without stress, we would never evolved. You look at astronauts who go into outer space, they get severe osteoporosis because they're in microgravity. So they have to work extra hard to not lose, 2 or 3% bone density of every month they're in space. Wow, but when they come back in the Earth atmosphere, well, they lose the bone density over the entire structure of the bone, not just around the outside, but the entire bone structure. But then when they come back to the Earth atmosphere and gravity, they grow it mostly around the outside. So it's really fragile. So you have really fit astronauts who riding bikes, walking downstairs, breaking bones. So the length of an astronaut, their bone density is accelerated of decline because they're not growing 100% of it back every time they come back.
I remember from that movie Gravity with Sandra Bullock and what's his name? But yeah, she lands, and I remember her crawling out, and she's like barely able to stand. And at first I thought it was like, oh, why is she so weak? And then I was like, oh, right, she's been in space for
if you don't use it, you literally lose it. And we forget that our bone, we think our bone is like the static, hard structure, but it has its own metabolism. It's constantly restructuring and reshaping itself. So it's remodeling based on its environment and its need. So part of our Qigong is about adjusting the environment. But what environment? We're addressing the physical environment that we're interacting with, but also our mental environment, because they both work at driving change. And if you can unify them, then you can accelerate change. They did the studies with people shooting basketball, free throws, where people just shot the free throws. They had a group that shot the free throws and then visualized shooting free throws, and they had a group that visualized free throws. And the group that did both did better. But it just showed you that, how powerful the mind was, because the people who just sat and thinking about it only did better than the people who practiced.
Wow.
And there was an Summer Olympics a while back, and there was a woman Olympic diver, high dive. And once she qualified, she got injured, and she couldn't practice. But every day she had her coach pull her up to the top of the platform, and she would sit up there for 4 or 5 hours a day going through her dives. And up to the Olympics, she didn't get much training in. And there was an opening for one of the Chinese women, missed their dive. And she nailed her dive. And then she nailed her next dive. And she won her next dive. It was like the first time in a long time that an American won first place in the high dive. It's usually the Chinese or somebody else. But she didn't get to practice. She just went through the routine in her mind over and over again. You see gymnasts, before they do their routine on the side of the high bar, you see them eyes closed and moving their head, and they're going through the routine in their mind because it's just as powerful.
So why is that?
I don't think our brain knows the difference. I remember in high school sleeping in class and dreaming I was falling and it's like, oh, whoa, okay, I didn't fall.
That used to happen to me so much.
Oh, yeah.
That's so much. Yeah.
It just shows how powerful our mind is. Like if you think about biting into a lemon, because you've bitten into lemon so many times before, you know that it's sour. So the sour means it's
I just felt it right here. I just
exactly.
thought about lemon.
And you started
automatically.
salivating.
Yeah.
So
and
that's
it
the
does
idea of a
changes.
mind, a thought driving physiological change.
Yeah. So it's like the body doesn't know the difference between something that's happening versus in the mind having it happen.
Right. But I guarantee you, if you every 10 minutes you think about biting into that lemon or lime, at some point it will stop salivating. It's like the boy that cried wolf. But every once in a while, if you bite into it again, they'll go, oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, yeah.
So we need to use the mind and we need to use the physical body. Because if you only use the mind, the body goes, oh, you're just bullshitting me. This isn't really going to happen. But if we engage the physical, then the cells change and the body goes, oh, there's a true demand. Let me evolve in this direction of my choice. So that's why our system, we are physical. Not only thinking interesting thoughts, but we're doing interesting things to put the body under a positive stress in a controlled environment to evolve in the direction that we're choosing of health and longevity.
Yeah, and speaking of physiology, I remember going to your class and y'all were hitting your stomach, chest, and parts. But then at the same time, we were at the park last year, and you like roundhouse kicked that metal pole.
Right.
So do you well, so first of all, like how did your bone become like that strong? You know, like do you practice kicking poles all the time?
That was the first time I ever kicked a pole. I've never kicked a pole like that before.
I tapped the pole and it hurt, and I saw you just boom. I'm like, oh
Yeah.
shoot, you know, and so I know I realized like, wow, okay, you know, your bone's really dense. I mean, there's just all this going on. Like, what did you do to get to that point?
Well, I mean, in that moment, I just thought I'm going to kick this pole. So, like,
Yeah.
versus the pole hitting me, it's a different story. Like, in soccer, if someone's not paying attention, that ball hits them in the head, they have a concussion. I don't care how trained they are. But when they're paying attention and they're ready for it, they hit the ball.
Yeah.
Different outcome. Same ball, same head, two different outcomes. The physics should be the same, but it's not.
Wow.
So when they hit it, their chi is helping interact. So to get to that example, what is sharpness? How does a knife cut through something? You know, if you ever think about it, it's like, well, what is sharpness? You know, what makes something sharp? Is that the point of it gets so narrow that when it's cutting through, the molecules move away.
Yeah.
What if things were so dense that the sharpest razor is dull or blunt compared to the density of the structure you're cutting through? So you can have the chi so dense and so full to where you can't get cut. You know, there was a video on YouTube, and this guy is in Indonesia, and I completely believe the guy can normally do that, but under showing off, he went and blood just went everywhere. But you can see the Shaolin monks, and they'll have the vegetables and they'll chop.
Yeah.
And my teacher says we can do that, but there's no need to. You know, it's a different method, but it just shows you that you can direct the energy and saturate the tissue to where it becomes something different.
So I liked how you explained that. So it's like making the body so dense with chi that it can't be penetrated, or in other words, like if it wasn't, maybe the skin will break or the flesh will break.
Right.
But this time, because the chi is so compacted that there's nothing it can't penetrate it.
Yeah. So you see the high-level masters who are just slicing through bricks, they're doing it energetically. That they're making their energy so sharp that it can just cut through those molecules with very little effort. Versus you see the martial artists, and they're just like whole body and
strength and
yeah. That's why you can see these masters take a piece of newspaper and just chop through a brick with a piece of newspaper.
Wow.
So that's the energy level. Most people aren't close to that, you know.
Right. That's so fascinating to understand that that's how it happens. And I always wondered. I'm learning this.
Yeah.
I'm hearing this for the first time because I don't know much about it. And a lot of times, like you see these masters, and like you said, they're chopping brick with their hands, but they don't look like they have the muscles or the strength, but yet it's a brick.
Yeah.
You know, and that's because they're making their chi so fine that it can penetrate something like a brick.
And the neat thing about chi is it's whatever you want it to be. It's dynamic. It's not limited to things. Like you can send your energy. Chi can penetrate through anything. X-rays can't go through lead.
Yeah.
You know, when you have an X-ray and you have a wall, you have to have a thick lead wall because you don't want people behind you getting screwed up from the radiation.
Yeah.
But chi can go through it. You know, there's lots of books about Chinese super psychics and qigong children who can like take a lead box and stick it up to their ear and they can tell you exactly what's in it. Or they can take pill bottles and then shake it and the pills pop out. So there's a whole world of things. But back to your idea of like, you know, monkey see, monkey do. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, if the high-level masters don't want to show off, well, how are we supposed to expose ourselves to these new things? And it's tricky. Yeah. You know, me growing up skateboarding as a kid, like, if you look at the Dogtown and Z-Boys documentary in California, they had the drought. It's interesting when you look at history and stuff. Yeah. They had a drought in California. And it's like all these swimming pools were open and empty, so they started skateboarding in pools. And for the longest time, they would carve and they would almost get out of the bowl. But one day, one guy left the pool, caught air, and came back in and changed skateboarding forever. But once one person did it, everybody was able to do it. Think about slam dunking. One person had to do it first. The forward pass in football, they didn't have rules that say you couldn't do it. And I forgot who the guys were, but they were figuring it out and they were practicing it. There was no rules so they couldn't do it, and they did it in the game, and the game changed. So it always takes one first to do something extraordinary. Yeah. You look at in Africa where you have the river and you have the zebras and stuff, and all the crocodiles or whatever. You don't see a herd going across the river first. You see one person going over first. So it's the powerful, interesting one that does it first, and they never get eaten. So they clear the path. Yeah, yeah. So it's pretty fascinating. So we kind of have to borrow from certain things to like the science and stuff, and you know, hopefully you can find a right teacher who can introduce you to these things and then do them because of the modeling that's presented to you. Yeah. Because my teacher has demonstrated very little to us, but everything he's wanted us to do, the instructors have been able to do, and if the instructors can do it, the students can do it. So he's keeping everything tight under wraps so he can go further versus constantly demonstrating. So I've done 2 demos in the past 10, 12 years. And I have no desire to do demos anymore. Because that's how we used to get students all the time. We'd do a demo and talk about what we do and have people hit us with bats and come punch us in the belly and stuff like that so they could feel the chi. Yeah. In the early days, Dr. Zhang was like, oh, you need to have people come up and feel it, because seeing it is one thing, feeling it's a completely different experience. And so we needed people to experience so they can kind of wrap their mind around it. Yeah, yeah. Now there's just this influx. People are like, I'm game for anything. Like, there's so much weird stuff out there. Like, that's not weird. I'll do it. I'll give it a try. Yeah, yeah. And I haven't had to do that. So I've had enough weird people. Like, I'm open-minded enough to try this out. Yeah. Experiment for themselves and see what happens in their own physiology, and they're just like, I'm hooked, this is great. But I remember doing a demo one time, and there was 2 of the little girls were demonstrating and punching each other, and then the instructor at the time was like, anybody want to feel this? And this guy's like, yeah, but I don't want to punch them. And he's like, well, okay. Well, I was like, okay, you can punch me. And he's like, I can just punch you anywhere in the belly as hard as I want. I'm just like, sure. Do you need to prepare? I was like, no. Wham! Real quick, without anything. And then he's like, oh, wow, and sat down. Afterwards, he's like, I had no idea what I was going to feel. And he was almost in tears. Like, it rocked him emotionally. But he said when he punched me, he felt this energy go all the way up his arm to his heart and just like spread through his chest. And he's like, I've never felt anything like that before. And surprisingly, he never signed up. And then I get a phone call like 8 years later, like, I went to this demo a long time ago, and you know, I had punched this person, and this is what I felt. I'm like, oh yeah, you punched me. He's like, no, I punched this little kid. I'm just like, no, you punched me. And he's like, that memory is stuck in my mind forever. And I was in Sedona doing some practice with a friend. I relayed that experience to my friend, and he's like, you need to do that training. And he came back and trained for like a month or two,
Yeah.
but never did more than that because he lived so far away.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's interesting that that one experience changed his life, like the way he thought. Just like the doctor shocking you, like you can't undo that. You can't take
Yeah.
that away.
Yeah.
So seeing these things firsthand is important too.
The direct experience.
Yeah, yeah. So if you see someone else do it, it's like, oh, no brainer. If they can do it, I can do it if given the right protocol.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would be, well, do you think that people can learn Qigong by doing, by themselves through maybe video or books? Maybe to like a certain level or,
Lots of styles of Qigong I think you can get benefit from
Yeah.
doing at home. Unfortunately, the style I teach, you just can't. You
Yeah.
know, you really need the instructor. It's to really take it to the high level, you need
yeah.
not day to day or class by class instruction, but you definitely need modifications like, you know, every few weeks.
Is there something easy that somebody can do to start cultivating their Qi that almost like anybody can kind of do, little learning curve or?
There's a lot of Qigong out there. There's
Yeah.
a lot of people teaching some really interesting, cool stuff.
Yeah.
Find a teacher. You know, learning with a teacher is going to accelerate anything. And you can't do harm. Well, if the teacher's teaching you correctly, you can't do harm. But it's best to have a teacher. Because, yeah. But, how do I answer this? Find a teacher. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So like, what happens if somebody, because I think if somebody, just like how that guy punched you and
Right.
that experience stayed with them, and I think if people, like you said, if they're able to experience, experience Qigong, experience this, it would be very convincing on their own versus learning, like, reading about it or
Right.
watching about it.
Right.
Is there a really simple practice or a simple move or anything that you think kind of help people kind of feel it, or
I think one of the best things to do is standing Qigong.
standing Qigong?
Just stand. They have a posture where they call it embracing the tree or standing on stakes. Your feet are rooted in the ground and you just stand. And as simple as this is,
Yeah.
10 minutes, your body's going to be... And that's from usually the energy blockages. So the body's going to naturally do what it can do to remove those and adapt and evolve. So one thing I like about our Qigong is different than a lot of Qigongs is a lot of Qigongs look soft and flowing and just guiding the energy.
Yeah.
And that's very useful. It can bring your health, it can restore your health. And what I mean by restore is if you have blockages in certain meridians, you're going to have imbalance and disease based on that.
Yeah.
If we correct the qi flow, then that will bring you back to normal. But some Qigong can do magical things and transform you into something completely different. So we can change our DNA, And when I grew up learning in school, like your DNA was set. We didn't know enough. Now we know about epigenetics and stuff like that. And and you hear about these stories of these yogis and the Qigong masters who were sick, and then they started doing the practice, and then they became extremely powerful and healthy, and they grew way beyond their limitations of their disease.
Yeah.
So some Qigong I think is useful. It gets the energy flowing and restores you to balance. Some Qigong will do that and then turn you into a whole new organism of extraordinary abilities and health and vitality. So I think those are putting a lot more energy in the container, not just moving the energy freely. You need both. You need flow and moving the energy freely, but to actually put more energy in the container, more voltage. Expand the meridians to where they can actually hold more energy. So you're changing the container.
So can you explain a little bit about meridians? Like what they are for the people who may not understand that.
Meridians are hard to explain, because they're based on qi.
Yeah.
And there's no evidence of qi. China spent millions and millions of dollars trying to research on qi, and they finally came up with the conclusion after years. We cannot prove that qi exists. We cannot prove that qi doesn't exist. So all of qigong and Chinese medicine is built on this framework of qi that we don't fully understand what it is or how it works.
Yeah.
But we can manipulate it, and through thousands of years of clinical experience and people experiencing it, they know how to work with it.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, we really don't know what electricity is, but we can use it to our benefit.
Yeah.
We know it's the movement of ions, but really, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
So we have all these wires running through the house and turn on lights and stuff and TV, but we don't know how that really works. So who cares if we don't know what qi is really? We can still work with it.
Yeah.
So meridians are a pathway in which qi flows through the body. It's a communication system. So when we went from one cell to 2 cells, what had happened for that to happen was there had to be some sort of communication between the 2 cells or they wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
So you have all these individual cells, they're on their own, and then all of a sudden these two came together. Well, they must have come together for a reason and to benefit each other. One can get the sun from above, one can get the water from below. So they had to create a channel of communication to share the nutrients and information. Some people believe that's the first meridian, was the pathway of communication from 1 cell to 2 cells, and then from 2 to 8, 2 to 4, 4 to 8.
Yeah.
And those were allowed the cells to communicate, was this network and pathway to share information. So I look at meridians as like a pathway where the qi flows so that the organs and the information and the qi can be distributed evenly and for the benefit of the whole organism.
And they also communicate. Do they communicate?
They communicate,
also
through the meridians. Yeah.
And I always imagine meridians as like, I see them like almost like blood vessels or veins that are running up and down. I mean, I know they're not veins, but I kind of see it in that.
It will look like that. It will look like that because we have the major meridians, but there's more than that.
Yeah.
When you look at from above, you look at a map of a region and you see the water pathways. Like for us in this region in Austin, Texas, we have Lake Travis.
Mm.
Well, Lake Travis is the Colorado River that they've dammed up.
Yeah.
So it's this big lake. But then it flows, and then you have like Town Lake or Lake Austin, then Town Lake, and then you have like Barton Spring flows into the Colorado River. Mm. So it's like you have these big pathways that we call Jinglo, like meridians. Mm-hmm. And then you have all these little tiny branches off of it. So all big rivers will flow into the oceans eventually. Mm-hmm. So we have these big meridians that we call the extraordinary vessels, which is like the seas. Then you have the bigger meridians, which are like big rivers, like the Mississippi River, Colorado River. And then you have all these tiny little branches, like all the creeks, go into the river eventually.
Yeah.
So that's how you have the big meridian, and you have all these little networks that are connected with that energy.
Yeah, yeah.
So with acupuncture right now, there's we're pretty concerned with chiropractors doing acupuncture, physical therapists doing dry needling and stuff, and saying, well, it's not acupuncture because the definition of acupuncture is putting needles in acupuncture points. But the thing is, the whole body is an acupuncture point. It doesn't have to be a meridian because the moment you put a needle in the body, the qi is going to, and the immune system is going to react to it and start to push it out. So for certain things, it's nice to needle on the meridian, mm-hmm. but we can still get tons of benefit needling off the meridian because there's a lot of meridians that we don't even really fully understand. Wow. So there's still so much we're trying to figure out. A lot of people say, acupuncture works on the fascial planes and stuff, and the meridians are like the fascial networks or the fascial.
Like the connecting points.
Yeah.
Between the.
Mm-hmm. But that's limited. That is a piece to it, but there's more to it as well.
So with acupuncture, there'll be like something wrong with the shoulder, and you'll be putting a needle like in their knee or something, or
that's how I practice, but not everyone does that. Some people will put needles right where it hurts.
Yeah. So how does because I've done some acupuncture, but for people that haven't done acupuncture, can you explain why needles will go in different places to fix something that is not in the same place? That's something I think maybe people would be wondering.
Well, okay, if you look at the Earth and the Moon,
Mm-hmm.
and we have high tide, low tides based on the gravitational pull from the Moon, is my understanding.
Mm-hmm.
So on one part of the Earth, when we're at high tide, the other part of the Earth is at low tide.
Yep.
So certain meridians are interconnected, and they flow into each other. So we can treat the opposite side of the body, the opposite meridians that are counterbalance that. So it's kind of like treating high tide for low tide and low tide for high tide, kind of balanced system. That is one aspect of it. And there's many models of why acupuncture works. And it's pretty fascinating because you can have people with different backgrounds and understandings do different points for different reasons. Like I might use this point for the immune system, but someone else might use this point for something else. And it's like, so the point isn't limited to a very specific, indications and actions.
Yeah.
But there's also the holographic representation of the whole body. Is all the cells that circulate through the body they have all the information of the entire organism. So that's why hand and foot reflexology exists, or ear acupuncture. Like this would be the head and the spine and the legs and all the internal organs. You can treat everything just through the ear. So you can break down one section of the body and it will mirror certain parts of the body. So I can break this one bone down into the whole body. And if I want to treat your low back, I can use this part. If I want to treat your head, I can do this part. Wow. So there's many mechanisms of how acupuncture works and many different systems. But yeah, it's interesting. When I was going through school, my only person I've had acupuncture with was my teacher, and he was very unorthodox. And I look at what I'm learning in school, and I'm looking at what all the other practitioners do. I'm just scratching my head like, why is everyone putting needles symmetrically on both sides when he was very, very asymmetrical and used very, very few needles? So, yeah, it's really fascinating. When you look at acupuncture too, once again, China had the Cultural Revolution.
Yeah.
So when Mao stepped in, he wanted to be Western. He was like, we need to catch up to the West. They're still superior. We got to get rid of all this magical stuff that's not scientific. And he destroyed Chinese medicine and acupuncture. So some of the high-level acupuncturists were ones that came from a family tradition because they had this knowledge that was intact through the Cultural Revolution. Or Japan and Taiwan, and Korea, they never had cultural revolutions. So their acupuncture is slightly different than the modern TCM acupuncture.
What can acupuncture be used for?
As an art form, I honestly don't think there's anything acupuncture can't treat. But I think not every acupuncturist can treat everything equally. Like for me, I do better with back pain than I do neck pain.
Yeah.
I do better with shoulder pain than knee pain. I love treating psycho-emotional stuff and trauma and food allergies. And you have the most bizarre, your doctors don't know what to do with you, then yeah, I like that kind of stuff because I can make change.
So you talked about treating trauma. So treating something in the mind through acupuncture.
Yeah.
So tell me how that works.
Complicated.
Yeah.
Because I've studied many different systems of acupuncture.
Yeah.
And one of the systems I really like is this woman, Dr. Devi. Her system is called NAET, Nambudra Plab's Allergy Elimination Technique. And as an Indian woman, she grew up really sick. And she couldn't eat anything. She was highly allergic to everything. And she found an Ayurvedic doctor who's like, you're allergic to everything. Just eat this, even though it was like really basic porridge. And she was still allergic to it, but at least she was getting something. Fast forward years later, she goes to chiropractic college and meets someone who's doing kinesiology and stuff. And it's like, oh, muscle testing her. It's like, oh, you're allergic to all this food. Well, this food you're the least allergic to, so you should just eat this.
Yeah.
And then learned about energy and stuff like that. And she's like, oh, well, I want to learn more about energy. And then started studying acupuncture. Yeah. So while she was in acupuncture school, she started experimenting on herself. Well, not experimenting on herself. She was just taking the few things that the kinesiologist said that she wasn't highly reactive to, just moderately reactive to. So she was eating a carrot and gave herself acupuncture and fell asleep. Even though she was allergic to the carrot, it was still a lesser of the other foods. Yeah, yeah. And then the next day, when she went to go eat the carrot, she noticed she felt really good from it. Like she didn't have her normal symptoms.
Wow.
So my understanding of her system is that everything's energy and vibration. So you can walk into a room with someone you don't know, and you know right away whether you vibrate with them or not.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you have your cell phone next to a speaker, sometimes your phone will make a weird funny noise.
Yeah.
So your phone is causing interference with that speaker. So the energy of the cell phone is causing disturbance.
Yeah.
So you bring something into your energy field, it can cause disturbance in your energy flow. So you bring kryptonite in Superman's environment, he goes really weak.
Mm-hmm.
So depending on which meridians go weak can explain the symptoms that someone has with that particular item. So some people say, I can't eat dairy, I get diarrhea. Or if I drink milk, I get diarrhea, but I can eat cheese, no problem. Well, I usually doubt that. Usually they're getting a different symptom, they just haven't connected the dots yet. They might get diarrhea with milk, but they might get brain fog or congestion with cheese. So if everything's energy and vibration, what she discovered was if you bring that substance that you're reactive to into your energy field, and the body shows weak, and you can pinpoint which meridians the energy is not flowing,
Mm-hmm.
then she does a protocol where you're tapping up and down the spine with all the different acupuncture points, all the nerve roots, feeding all this information to the brain, activating all this energy through the meridians while you're holding this thing that you're allergic to. So it's repatterning your reaction to that vibrational substance.
Wow.
And then you test again, it's like, oh, strong, all the meridians strong, while this is in your energy field. So imagine like taking kryptonite in Superman's environment, doing the tapping and stuff, and all of a sudden now he's not reactive to it. So then you remove it out of the energy field, and she recommends staying away from that substance for 25 hours to repattern the energy. So it's like updating the software. You know, when you update the software, you have to reboot the computer.
So somebody wouldn't even need to ingest this food. They can simply be around the frequency of the food and
Be
get
allergic
their
to
body,
it. Yeah.
and get their body to adjust to it.
When I learned this practice, I had never been treated for it. My friend talked about it, and when I first heard about it, I was like, oh, I don't believe that. That's too far-fetched. And then I met this person, and she was able to explain it on a really high level. I was like, oh my God, yes, I get it now. Whoever explained it before didn't really understand it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go. And I went and did the training. And when she tested me, I had never had muscle testing done or any of that stuff. And she's like, anybody strong and want to test? I'm like, sure, test me. And boom, I'm like, what the fuck? And then she put a vial of egg in my hand. And I was like, oh, I didn't know. And I was like, I didn't know I was reacting to eggs. And I was vegan for a long time prior to that. But then she put the egg vial in someone else's hand standing in front of me, and weak. And the person walked across the room, step by step. Every step she tested me. I was allergic to it from 19 steps. 20 steps away, I was fine. So people can be allergic to things from a very long distance.
Wow. So what was happening was you're feeling the energy of
the signature of that substance was causing disturbance in my energy system.
Wow.
And then once we treat for it, and once we recalibrate and reboot the system, then the body goes, oh, no problem. Because why are we reacting to all these things that are very, very common? You shouldn't react to dairy, you shouldn't react to eggs, we shouldn't react to wheat and all these things. But we are. What's going on with that?
I think people don't really see that there's an energy signature, energy that's like energy field of everything.
Oh, yeah. Like especially in this day and age, like all the information, all the stuff that's in this little room, like all the Wi-Fi signals, the cell phones, the 5G that's coming, like we are so used to things being tangible, but we don't really understand the invisible. So it's like, radio waves, cell phone waves, Wi-Fi. We know how to work with it, but we don't comprehend it. So the invisible has always been kind of tricky for people to grasp, and that's why Qi is so elusive.
Do you know the effects of like cell phone signals or Wi-Fi signals?
It depends on the person, and we're bombarded with it. So the one reason, like my Qigong system that I studied with my teacher comes from a martial background, and we don't have to protect ourselves hand-to-hand combat anymore. Yeah. But Dr. Zhang has said, let's use this for health and longevity because we know how strong it makes the body. So we can train ourselves to be resilient and adaptive to our changing environment because it's changing. There's hundreds of thousands of man-made chemicals that are toxic. Yeah. Just out now recently, it's like, oh, sunscreen, toxic. Well, we've known that for a long time, but just no one wanted to hear it. Yeah. It hit a tipping point where we couldn't ignore it. But with Wi-Fi, some people have a resilience to it, and some people are extremely sensitive to it. And you're seeing a lot of the autistic children nowadays. If you just turn off all the Wi-Fi and all the EMFs and you get them away from this stuff, they do better. So there's a lot that we don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So speaking of, so your Qigong practice, it's more for longevity.
Longevity. Yeah. Health, vitality, longevity, resiliency. Yeah.
But it still also trains your body to be incredibly strong.
Oh, of course. That's a side effect. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, you know, we know with elder people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, if they break their hip and they get surgery, they don't have a really good prognosis. You know, especially the older they get, when they break their hip, it's really hard to bounce back from.
Yeah.
We know in sports performance, boxers, basketball, sports, you can go, wow, they lost their legs.
Yeah.
Once their legs are gone, everything declines. So if we can keep the physical strong, keep the legs strong, keep the vitality strong, we can have good health longevity. Yeah.
And so, okay, we were talking earlier about about acupuncture helping trauma.
Right.
So acupuncture helping trauma. So can you explain like how that relates to trauma again? Because we were talking about like the food.
Oh,
allergies.
yeah. So I went back to, so the system I use a lot with that is her systems, where we can actually access and replay some of the traumatic events in our mind. Just like how you bite into a lemon, thinking biting into a lemon, you salivate.
Yeah.
Well, when you think about traumatic events, you actually access this data bank of these files that have a particular pattern of how your energy flows. So you think about like in the old days when they had those player pianos, but they had the little reels and the paper reels. It was a program of for the keys to play.
Yeah,
So we can go back in memory and access one of those memory files, and there's an energy signature that's related to that file.
Yeah.
So what we do is we replay and access that memory file while we repattern the energy to flow. So if someone has something traumatic and fearful, the kidney meridian, the heart meridian, certain meridians shut down, the energy is not flowing, and then they're like, whatever. So we have them access that file, and then we get the energy to flow and repattern itself, and we update the software.
So usually they're accessing that file, thinking of this memory or trauma, and their body is feeling this anxiety, pain, or all this stuff. So then you get them to access it, and then, but you're letting the energy flow, so they don't feel that anxiety and trauma, even though they're accessing that event.
Exactly.
And then over time, they get used to a certain a certain energy signature. It's like you create a new energy signature associated to this event that used to be
exactly. Yeah. And you know, NLP, things that Tony Robbins uses, great for trauma and repatterning and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Like if you really want to get rid of trauma, NLP is a really valuable tool.
Well, it's like also like EFT. That's something.
EFT, but I think EFT is a little slow, and you have to do it way more than people actually think. So it's not just one time I do this. It's like you're doing it constantly because you're repatterning it.
Yeah.
It's just not that strong to where you have, you know, it's like this strong event versus this tapping. Well, that event's way stronger.
Yeah.
You have to keep doing it and doing it frequency to repattern the energy. And one reason I like acupuncture is because when we put the needle in the body, it's damaging tissue. And there's a reason for the body to remember and respond to that versus like, okay, energy, you're flowing, and then you think a particular thought, now your energy is going back to its original state.
Yeah.
When we do damage, we can create a little bit of damage to the cells, and the body has to go in there and fix it, and it kind of holds that memory a little stronger. It's back to the idea of imagining shooting basketball hoops, or imagining and doing.
It's just more. It's just
anchoring
more
it into
experiential.
It's anchoring it into the physiology. And the more you bring in the different senses, the more you make it real, the more the brain believes it as to being, you know, powerful and real. Like I just got back from Disney World, and most of the rides nowadays are these 3D glass things, IMAX, and you're in these little things, and they have things pushing on you, and to the point where they're actually spraying certain smells.
Yeah.
So it's not just you're seeing, feeling, you have the wind blowing in you, they're blowing these smells, and it's just like, wow, sensory overload.
Yeah.
But the thing is, if they didn't do all that, you're just like, yeah, it's okay.
Yeah.
But because they're adding it all in, it becomes like, wow, that seemed so real.
And then now somebody becomes more familiar. That experience
Yeah,
is stays with them longer.
for sure. Yeah.
Wow, wow.
So what we want to do with Qigong is like tune everything out as much as we can so we can be present with what's going on, listen to our body, know when we're underdoing it, know when we're overdoing it, and being as mindful as possible. So going back to like what could someone do to access Qigong and get benefits from Qigong is just turn stuff off, be still for a few minutes and just listen what's going on inside your body, because we're in sensory overload more than ever. And just to be still, and might get glimpses of this bioenergy that's flowing through the body.
That subtle energy, like that subtle vibration that's inside the body, whoa, is that what Qi feels like, or is that the sensation of Qi, or how would someone know if they're connecting to the Qi in their body?
Qi has many, many manifestations of it. Some can say it feels electromagnetic. Some can say it feels hot. Some say it can feel cold. Some can feel tingling and stuff. Sometimes in practice or in meditation, people will belch or fart. We call that purging the evil winds and stuff. So that can actually...
Purging the evil winds.
Yeah.
Oh, I purge a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I remember one time being in Taiwan studying with this Qigong master, and like everybody was burping and farting and stuff. I was just like, okay, this is interesting.
Yeah.
But it's like different culture. It's like they're looking at this is a good thing versus here it's like, oh, that's so rude. It's like, you're silly, so uptight that you're going to cause yourself health problems.
Yeah, yeah.
Versus like getting rid of the stuff.
Yeah.
But what was I? Where was I? Taiwan.
Feeling the Qi, or
Oh.
knowing or sensing the Qi. And you're saying you're
Yeah.
sensing it in all these different ways.
So sometimes people will get spontaneous movements. They'll just jerk. Sometimes in acupuncture, people will be really still and they'll just jerk. It's the energy's trying to find ways to move, and it can come across these blockages, and then it's busting through it. If you look at like these man-made dams, like the new dam out in New Braunfels or whatever, just busted open.
Yeah.
It's like you imagine this energy, this water that wants to flow, and you dammed it up.
Yeah.
At some point, it's going to knock down the levee, knock down the dam, and it's going to flow. And it can feel like that, where it's like you feel this pressure building up, and then it releases.
How about when somebody's sleeping?
Happens with that too.
Somebody's sleeping and it just jerks, or just that little thing.
It's your body's trying to correct itself. So that's why meditation is so useful.
So when you say it's trying to correct itself, that means there's blockages of energy?
Yeah. The body has such an intelligence to know what to do. We just have to get out of our own way.
Yeah.
And if we can turn our mind off temporarily, then the body goes, thank you, now I got a chance to do something. Because whatever you're thinking, wherever your mind's spread out, you're sending energy there to try to create that.
Yeah.
So if you can go inwards and just turn everything off, just reset, then the body goes, thank you, okay, let me fix these things real quick.
Wherever your attention goes, your energy goes.
Exactly. So it's hard to I love Bruce Lipton and hearing his stuff about when he was studying cells and stuff. And he's like, if you have a cell in a petri dish and you put food in there, it will go towards the food.
Yeah.
If you put a toxin in there, it will run away from it. You can't go forward and backwards at the same time.
Yeah.
So you can't regenerate and digest at the same time you're in fear. So we need to reset.
Wow. That makes a lot of sense, because I tell people all the time, people are talking about the problems, and they're talking about, man, how can I get rid of this problem? And they keep talking about it. I'm like, well, you just got to stop putting your attention to these problems and put your attention to solutions.
Exactly.
And then when I think about this, if somebody puts their attention, something's wrong with their body, instead of constantly thinking about the problems in their body and thinking about it, they should just put their attention in their body to connect to their body, and then their body will naturally have the energy
For sure.
to fix it, because naturally their attention is somewhere else, and therefore they're not giving their body the energy it needs to heal.
Right. And that's why going into gratitude is so useful, is you go inwards and it's just appreciation, gratitude. It allows everything to relax.
Yeah.
Versus what's wrong with me? How do I fix this? It's people just spin, and don't take action. Yeah, I think one of the best things, even just sitting in a chair 15 minutes, close your eyes, turn everything else off, and just breathe.
Yeah.
And just watch how it transforms things. Yeah.
Nice. Well, this is all the time we have for today, man. This is awesome, man.
Yeah, I'm glad we got to do this.
Thank you, brother.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, so you have a